And as Chris Mitchell reports, some experts fear the Dead Sea could be drying up.
Something is happening right now at the Dead Sea that scientists cannot fully explain. Fish are swimming in waters that should kill them instantly. Fresh water is flowing into a place that has been completely lifeless for 4,000 years. And a prophet who died 2,600 years ago described this exact moment in detail. Not vaguely, not symbolically. He named the locations. He described the fish. He even described the fishermen. And what he wrote is happening right now. But here is what nobody is talking about. This isn't the only thing he predicted. And the things that come after this moment in his prophecy are far more significant than fish in a salt lake, far more significant than fresh water breaking through cracked desert ground. What comes next in Ezekiel's timeline should stop every single person watching this video dead in their tracks. Because if this part of the prophecy is happening now, then what comes next is already in motion. Most people know the Dead Sea by one image. A person floating on the surface, reading a newspaper, completely relaxed, not sinking. That image exists because of one simple fact. The Dead Sea is nearly 10 times salter than the ocean. 10 times. At that level of salt concentration, the human body becomes so buoyant it cannot sink. But here is the other side of that fact. Nothing lives in that water. No fish, no plants, no bacteria, nothing. The salt kills everything that enters. That is why it has carried the same name for thousands of years. The Dead Sea, not the Quiet Sea, not the Salt Sea, the Dead Sea, because for 4,000 years, that name has been completely accurate. Now think about what it would take to change that. You cannot simply add fresh water to a body of water that's salty and expect fish to appear. The chemistry does not work that way. The ecosystem does not work that way. Nature does not work that way. And yet, photographers began capturing images of fish in the Dead Sea region. Environmental scientists began documenting freshwater springs breaking through the ground. Springs that had been sealed underground for potentially thousands of years. Suddenly cracking open. Suddenly flowing. Suddenly creating pools of water where tilapia and other freshwater species are not just surviving. They are thriving. One scientist standing on the cracked, dry earth where the Dead Sea shoreline used to be said something that is hard to forget. He said the place had become so desolate that even the worst forces of nature seemed to avoid it. And yet life was coming back anyway. That sentence should land differently once you understand what Ezekiel wrote. Because Ezekiel did not just predict water and fish. He predicted this specific transition, from total death to returning life. And he connected it to a sequence of events that he said would follow. Events that line up with what is happening in the world right now in ways that are difficult to dismiss. So here is the question that is going to drive everything in this video. If a prophet writing in 597 BC got this detail right, if he named the exact locations where fishermen would one day stand, if he described fresh water flowing into the saltiest body of water on Earth before modern science even understood salt chemistry, then what do the rest of his predictions mean for the world right now? That is what this video is going to answer. And by the end, the question will not be whether Ezekiel was accurate. The question will be whether anyone is paying attention. To understand why fish appearing in the Dead Sea is significant, you need to understand what the Dead Sea actually is. Not just the salt, not just the floating tourists, the full picture. Because once you see it completely, what is happening there right now becomes almost impossible to explain away. The Dead Sea sits in the Jordan Rift Valley, right between Israel and Jordan. It is the lowest point on the surface of the entire Earth, 1,400 feet below sea level. To put that in perspective, if you drove from the Dead Sea straight up to sea level, you would climb higher than the tallest building in New York City. That is how far below the rest of the world this place sits. And because it sits so low, water flows into it, but has nowhere to go. The Jordan River feeds it from the north. Smaller streams feed it from the sides. But there is no outlet, no river flowing out, no drain, no exit. The water just sits there. And in the intense desert heat, it evaporates, leaving the salt and minerals behind. Over thousands of years, that process repeated itself so many times that the salt concentration reached nearly 33%, 10 times saltier than any ocean on Earth. At that concentration, the water becomes something closer to a mineral soup than a lake. Swimmers describe it as slippery, almost oily. Your eyes burn if the water touches them. Your skin feels coated after you climb out. And anything biological that enters that water is destroyed almost immediately. No fish, no algae, no insects, no microorganisms of any meaningful kind. Just salt, minerals, and silence. That has been the reality of the Dead Sea for 4,000 years. But here is what most people do not know about this region. It was not always this way. Go back far enough in the biblical record, and this entire valley was described as extraordinarily fertile. Genesis describes it as well-watered, green, abundant, like a garden, the kind of land people would choose to settle because everything grew there. Then judgment fell on the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Fire came down, the valley was destroyed, and what had been green and fertile became a wasteland. A permanent reminder carved into the geography of the earth itself. That transition from life to death happened roughly 4,000 years ago. And for 4,000 years, the Dead Sea has held that identity. Death, salt, silence. Now here is where the story shifts. Because while the Dead Sea has been defined by death for 4 millennia, it has also been slowly disappearing. Every single year, the water level drops by approximately 3 feet. 3 feet every year. That might not sound dramatic until you consider that this has been happening for decades. The shoreline that tourists photographed in the 1960s is now hundreds of meters from the water's edge. Hotels that were built on the shore now sit far back from the water. Roads that once ran near the coastline are now cracked and broken. And the ground itself is changing in a way nobody predicted. As the water recedes, it leaves behind thick deposits of salt just beneath the surface. And those deposits are unstable. When fresh water from underground reaches those salt layers, the salt dissolves, and the ground collapses. Suddenly, without warning. Sinkholes, hundreds of them, some the size of a car, some the size of a house, opening up across the landscape around the Dead Sea like the ground is cracking open from the inside. Engineers have documented over 6,000 sinkholes in the region. 6,000. And while that sounds like nothing but bad news, something unexpected began happening inside those sinkholes. When the ground collapsed and the underground layers cracked open, something that had been sealed away for potentially thousands of years began pushing through to the surface. Fresh water, underground springs, ancient water sources, trapped beneath layers of salt and rock, suddenly flowing. And in those pools of fresh water, something appeared that had no scientific business being there. Fish, tilapia, other freshwater species, swimming in pools just meters away from some of the saltiest water on Earth. Alive, healthy, reproducing. Scientists documented it. Photographers captured it. And the question that nobody could fully answer was simple. How? How does fresh water appear in the middle of a salt desert? How do fish end up in pools that sit at the edge of the most lifeless body of water on Earth? The geological explanation involves underground aquifers and tectonic activity. The chemistry involves dilution and flow rate. But even the scientists documenting this phenomenon acknowledged something unusual was happening. Something that did not fit the expected pattern of what the Dead Sea was supposed to do. The Dead Sea was supposed to keep shrinking. It was supposed to keep dying. Nobody predicted life returning to it. Nobody except one person, writing in 597 BC. And that is where this story stops being about geology and starts being about something much harder to explain. Because Ezekiel did not stumble onto this prediction. He did not guess. He described it in specific detail. The water flowing, the fish appearing, the fishermen standing on the shore, the exact locations named. And he wrote it down 2,600 years before a single photograph of a fish in the Dead Sea existed. That is either the most remarkable coincidence in human history, or it is something else entirely. And the answer to that question changes everything about what comes next. Because what comes next in Ezekiel's prophecy is not just about the Dead Sea. It is about the entire world, and it is already beginning. To understand what Ezekiel predicted, you need to understand who Ezekiel was. Because his background is not just historical detail. It is the reason his words carry the weight they do. Around 597 BC, a priest named Ezekiel was living in Babylon. Not by choice. Jerusalem had fallen. The temple had been destroyed. The people of Israel had been torn from their land and scattered across a foreign empire. Ezekiel was one of them, taken from everything he knew, living in exile in a country that was not his own. And in that darkness, in that season of complete loss, he began receiving visions. Not dreams, not impressions, not vague spiritual feelings. Detailed, specific, geographic, named. The kind of visions that do not come from imagination. One of those visions is recorded in Ezekiel chapter 47, and what he describes in that chapter is worth reading slowly, because every detail matters. In the vision, Ezekiel is standing at the temple in Jerusalem. Water begins flowing from under the threshold of the temple, just a trickle at first, moving east, toward the Dead Sea. But as Ezekiel follows the water, something happens. It gets deeper. First it reaches his ankles. He keeps walking. It reaches his knees. He keeps walking. It reaches his waist. He keeps walking. And then it becomes too deep to cross on foot. A river, a full river, flowing toward the Dead Sea. Now here is where most people stop reading, because the image of water flowing from a temple sounds symbolic, poetic, spiritual. But Ezekiel does not stop at poetry. He keeps going. And what he describes next is not symbolic at all. He describes what happens when that water reaches the Dead Sea. He says the water there becomes fresh. Not partially fresh, not less salty, fresh. And then he says something that would have sounded completely insane to anyone reading it for the first 2,500 years of its existence. He says swarms of living creatures will live wherever the river flows. Large numbers of fish, because this water flows there and makes the salt water fresh. So where the river flows, everything will live. Stop and think about that for a moment. A man writing in 597 BC is describing biological life returning to the Dead Sea. He is describing fresh water transforming salt water. He is describing fish appearing where only death existed before. And he is writing this at a time when the Dead Sea had already been lifeless for over 3,000 years. This was not a new body of water he was describing. This was the most famously dead place in the known world. And he said life was coming back to it. But Ezekiel does not stop there either. He gives geographic coordinates, real places, actual locations. He says fishermen will stand along the shore from En-Gedi to En-Eglaim. En-Gedi is a real place. You can visit it today. It is an oasis on the western shore of the Dead Sea. It has freshwater springs. It has vegetation. People go there now. En-Eglaim is believed to be somewhere along the northern shore. Ezekiel is not speaking in spiritual metaphors when he names these locations. He is describing a physical scene. Fishermen, standing on a shore that is currently underwater or cracked salt flats. Casting nets, pulling in fish of many kinds. Fish like the fish of the Mediterranean Sea. Normal fish, healthy fish, abundant fish. Now consider what it took for this prediction to come true. The Dead Sea would need to stop being a closed salt system. Fresh water would need to appear from somewhere beneath the ground. That fresh water would need to flow into or alongside the Dead Sea in sufficient quantity to support aquatic life. And actual fish would need to appear in that region. Every single one of those conditions was considered scientifically impossible for most of recorded history. And every single one of those conditions is now being documented. The sinkholes cracking open the earth. The underground springs pushing through to the surface. The fresh water pools forming at the edges of the Dead Sea. The fish appearing in those pools. Tilapia, swimming, thriving. Photographers documenting it. Scientists recording it. This is not a rumor. This is not a fringe claim from a prophecy website. This is documented environmental science happening in real time. And it lines up with what Ezekiel wrote with a precision that is genuinely difficult to explain. But here is the part of this that most people miss entirely. Ezekiel was not the only prophet who saw this. About 70 years after Ezekiel, another prophet named Zechariah received a strikingly similar vision. Different man, different time, different circumstances. Same message. Zechariah wrote that living water would flow out from Jerusalem, half toward the eastern sea, half toward the western sea. The eastern sea is the Dead Sea. Two prophets, 70 years apart, both describing the same transformation of the same body of water. That is not coincidence. That is confirmation. When two independent sources describe the same specific event with the same geographic detail across a 70-year gap, that is the kind of pattern that demands serious attention. And here is where this gets personal for every person watching this video. Because Ezekiel's vision was not just about water and fish. It was about the sequence of events surrounding that transformation. He placed the Dead Sea prophecy inside a much larger picture. A picture of restoration, of return, of spiritual awakening. And every single layer of that picture is either already fulfilled or currently unfolding. Which means the Dead Sea is not the main event. The Dead Sea is the signal. The marker that tells you exactly where you are on the timeline. And once you understand that, the question shifts from whether this is happening to what it means that it is happening right now. That answer is coming. But first you need to understand how accurate Ezekiel actually was before this moment. Because the Dead Sea is not the first time he got something exactly right. Before asking anyone to take prophecy seriously, there has to be a track record. Evidence. Documented. Verifiable. Historical. Not feelings. Not interpretations. Not things that could mean anything. Specific predictions. Specific outcomes. Specific matches. Ezekiel has that track record, and it is one of the most documented cases of predictive accuracy in human history. Start with the city of Tyre. In Ezekiel's time, Tyre was one of the most powerful cities in the ancient world. A major port on the Mediterranean coast. Wealthy, fortified, connected to every major trade route in the known world. The kind of city that seemed untouchable. And Ezekiel made a prediction about it that would have seemed completely absurd to anyone who heard it. He said Tyre would be destroyed. He said its stones and timber would be thrown into the sea. He said the bare rock left behind would become a place where fishermen spread their nets to dry. At the time, that prediction made no logical sense. You do not throw a city's stones into the sea. Cities do not work that way. Destruction does not work that way. Then Alexander the Great arrived. When Alexander approached Tyre with his army, the people of the city made a calculated decision. They evacuated to an island just offshore. They figured they were safe. Alexander had a massive land army, but no significant naval force. No ships meant no way to reach an island. They thought they had won. Alexander did not see it that way. He ordered his soldiers to demolish the entire mainland city, every stone, every piece of timber, every wall, and throw it all into the sea, building a causeway from the rubble of the city itself, a land bridge from the mainland to the island. Then he crossed it and took the city. Ezekiel said the stones and timber would be thrown into the sea. That is exactly what happened. Every stone, every beam, into the water, to build a road. Today, if you visit the ancient site of Tyre, you find bare rock, and fishermen spreading their nets to dry on that same bare rock, exactly as Ezekiel described, written centuries before Alexander was born. That is not a vague prediction. That is not a coincidence. That is specific detail fulfilled with specific historical accuracy. But Tyre is not the only example. Consider the prophet Isaiah and a king named Cyrus. Around 150 years before Cyrus was born, Isaiah the prophet wrote his name, not as a historical figure, as a future one. He wrote that a king named Cyrus would free the Jewish people from captivity in Babylon, that this king would decree the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem, that he would provide resources to make it happen. Isaiah named him, described his actions, wrote it all down, 150 years before Cyrus existed. Then Cyrus was born. He became king of Persia. He conquered Babylon, and he issued a decree freeing the Jewish people and authorizing the rebuilding of the temple. He even provided materials and funding. Everything Isaiah wrote happened exactly as written, with a man whose name Isaiah had recorded 150 years before his birth. There is no rational explanation for that apart from two options. Either it was an extraordinary coincidence, or someone outside of time described what they could already see. And when you stack that example on top of Tyre, and then stack both of those on top of the Dead Sea transformation, the coincidence explanation starts to collapse under its own weight. Consider one more example before moving on. The Psalms of David describe in detail an event that would not occur for nearly 1,000 years after they were written: the crucifixion. Before crucifixion even existed as a method of execution, the Psalms described pierced hands and feet. They described people dividing garments and casting lots for clothing. They described crowds mocking a man while he suffered in public. They described bones out of joint, a parched throat, surrounded by enemies. All of this written centuries before Rome existed, centuries before crucifixion was invented. And when Jesus was crucified, soldiers cast lots for his clothing. His hands and feet were pierced. Crowds mocked him. Every detail matched. Now here is why all of this matters so much. Overall, scholars who study biblical prophecy have documented that approximately 81% of all biblical predictions have already been fulfilled with historical accuracy. 81%. That is not a passing grade on a test. That is one of the highest rates of predictive accuracy ever documented in any ancient text. And the remaining prophecies that have not yet been fulfilled, they are lining up, right now, in real time. The Dead Sea is one of them. But there are others. And the others are the ones that should be keeping people awake at night. Because they describe events at a global scale. Events that involve every nation, every person, every economy on Earth. Events that current technology is now making possible for the first time in history. And before getting to those, there is one more layer of the Dead Sea prophecy that most people completely overlook. Because Ezekiel did not just predict the water and the fish. He placed that prediction inside a specific sequence. A sequence that describes events happening in a particular order. And the order matters. Because it tells you exactly what stage of the timeline the world is currently in. And what comes immediately after this stage is something that cannot be ignored. Ezekiel's prophecy was never just about the Dead Sea. To understand the Dead Sea transformation, you have to read it inside the larger vision it belongs to. Because Ezekiel described a sequence, a specific order of events. And that order is one of the most striking things about what he wrote. In Ezekiel 36 and 37, before he ever gets to the Dead Sea, he describes something else first. He describes a valley full of dry bones, scattered across the ground, bleached, lifeless, completely dry, no connection to each other, no flesh, no breath, just bones. And then he watches as something happens. The bones begin to come together, connecting, joining, flesh forming over them. And then breath enters them, and they stand up, a vast army, alive. Ezekiel is told directly what this vision means. These bones represent the entire house of Israel, a people scattered across the earth, disconnected, lifeless as a nation. And the vision describes their restoration. Physical restoration first, the bones coming together, the flesh forming, the breath entering, a nation returning to life. In 1948, after nearly 2,000 years of exile, Israel became a nation again. 2,000 years, not 50 years, not 100 years. 2,000 years of being scattered across every nation on earth. No homeland, no central government, no unified territory, just a people dispersed among the nations. And then in a single moment in 1948, that changed. A nation reborn, in the exact territory Ezekiel described. Dry bones coming together. That event alone is historically unprecedented. No other people group in recorded history has maintained their identity across 2,000 years of displacement and then returned to re-establish their nation in their ancestral homeland. It has never happened before. It has never happened since. It happened once, in 1948, and Ezekiel described it. But Ezekiel did not stop at the physical restoration of the nation. He described what would follow. He said the people would return to their land from every nation where they had been scattered. Since 1948, Jewish people have returned to Israel from over 100 countries. From Europe, from Africa, from the Americas, from Asia, from places Ezekiel could never have visited or known about. They came back, millions of them, returning to the land just as the prophecy described. Then Ezekiel described a third stage. After the physical restoration of the nation, after the return of the people from the nations, he described a spiritual awakening, a new heart, a new spirit, something internal, something that changes people at the deepest level, a recognition, a return, not just to the land, but to faith. Right now, more Jewish people believe in Jesus as their Messiah than at any time since the first century. The first century, that is the period immediately after Jesus walked the earth, the period of the original apostles. 2,000 years later, that level of recognition is returning. Messianic congregations are growing across Israel. Young Jewish people are reading about Jesus and concluding independently that he is the Messiah their scriptures described. The third stage Ezekiel described is happening now. 3 stages, all described by Ezekiel, all unfolding in the correct sequence. Physical restoration of the land. Check. Return of the people from the nations. Check. Spiritual awakening among the Jewish people. Currently unfolding. And the Dead Sea transformation sits inside this sequence. It is part of the restoration picture. The land coming back to life alongside the people. But here is the part of the sequence that demands the most attention. Because after describing the land restoration and the spiritual awakening, Ezekiel describes something else. Something in chapters 38 and 39 that has not happened yet. But that looks increasingly familiar to anyone paying attention to global news. He describes a massive military coalition forming, a gathering of nations from the north, powerful, organized, moving toward Israel. He names the participants: Persia, Ethiopia, Libya, a great northern power. Persia is modern-day Iran. The great northern power lines up geographically with Russia. Ethiopia and Libya are real nations in their original geographic locations. And right now, in the current geopolitical landscape, these nations are aligned in opposition to Israel in ways that would have been difficult to predict just a generation ago. Iran has openly called for the destruction of Israel. Russia has deepened military relationships with Iran. The alliances Ezekiel described are forming. Not fully, not yet at the point of invasion, but forming. The stage is being set, and Ezekiel describes what happens when that invasion comes. The armies do not succeed. God intervenes directly. Earthquakes, fire. The invading forces are destroyed on the mountains of Israel. And after that event, Ezekiel says the nations of the world will recognize what happened. They will understand that Israel is under divine protection. And from that moment, the timeline accelerates toward its conclusion. This is the sequence Ezekiel laid out. Nation reborn. Check. People returning. Check. Spiritual awakening. In progress. Dead Sea transformation. Beginning now. Military coalition forming. Currently developing. Divine intervention. Coming. Every stage before the last two has already been fulfilled. Every stage, with historical accuracy, in the correct sequence. Which means the stages that have not yet fully unfolded are not questions of whether. They are questions of when. And the Dead Sea transformation is the most recent stage to begin, which places the world at a very specific point on Ezekiel's timeline, closer to the end of the sequence than the beginning. Much closer. And there is other evidence that confirms this timing. Evidence that does not come from the Bible. Evidence that comes from the technology sitting in everyone's pocket. For most of human history, certain prophecies in the Bible seemed impossible. Not just unlikely, physically impossible. The technology to fulfill them simply did not exist. And then it did, within the span of a single generation. The book of Revelation describes a global economic system. A system so complete and so controlled that no one anywhere on earth can buy or sell without a specific identification. A mark, a number, a verification system tied to individual identity. For centuries, Bible scholars read that and called it symbolic, because the logistics of tracking every single financial transaction on earth involving every single human being were beyond imagination. No computer, no database, no network could handle that. It was technologically impossible. Then came the internet. Then came digital banking. Then came smartphones with biometric identification. Then came blockchain technology capable of recording every transaction in a permanent, unalterable ledger. Then came artificial intelligence capable of monitoring, analyzing, and flagging patterns across billions of data points simultaneously. And suddenly the impossible became not just possible, but nearly operational. The infrastructure for a global transaction monitoring system exists right now. Today, not in theory, not in a laboratory, in practice, in use, being developed and expanded by governments and financial institutions around the world. Several nations have already moved to central bank digital currencies, systems where every transaction is recorded, traceable, and subject to restriction. The technology that Revelation describes as the foundation of end-times commerce is not a future development. It is a current one. Revelation also describes an event that puzzled scholars for nearly 2,000 years. 2 witnesses are killed in Jerusalem, and the Bible says that people from every nation on earth will see their bodies lying in the street. For most of Christian history, that statement required a symbolic interpretation, because there was no mechanism by which the entire world could simultaneously witness a single event in Jerusalem. News traveled slowly. Information moved by ship and messenger. A global simultaneous viewing of any event was physically impossible. Now consider what happens when any significant event occurs in Jerusalem today. Live streaming, satellite feeds, social media, news networks broadcasting simultaneously to every device on Earth. The entire world watched the same events unfold in real time during the most recent conflicts in the Middle East. Billions of people, same images, same moment. What required symbolic interpretation for 1900 years is now Tuesday afternoon on the internet. The technology caught up to the prophecy. Then there is artificial intelligence. Daniel the prophet, writing around 600 BC, described the end times as a period when knowledge increases rapidly. The original Hebrew word used suggests an exponential surge, a sudden acceleration, not gradual growth, a leap. For most of recorded history, human knowledge grew slowly. It took centuries for major scientific discoveries to change daily life. Then the Industrial Revolution compressed that timeline. Then the Digital Revolution compressed it further. And now artificial intelligence is compressing it again, in ways that are genuinely difficult to track. In 2022, a major AI language model was released to the public. Within months, it had more users than any technology platform in history had acquired in years. Within a year, AI was writing legal documents, diagnosing medical conditions, generating images, writing code, composing music, and analyzing data at a scale that would have required thousands of human specialists just a decade earlier. Knowledge is not just increasing. It is accelerating at a rate that was not considered possible even 10 years ago. Daniel described this, writing in 600 BC. And then there are the global disruptions. Jesus himself described signs that would precede the end times. Wars and rumors of wars. Nation rising against nation. Kingdom against kingdom. Famines. Earthquakes. Pestilences. In various places. He described these as birth pains. Not the end itself, but the contractions that signal the end is approaching. And he said they would increase in frequency and intensity as the time drew closer. In the span of just the last few years. A global pandemic that disrupted every nation simultaneously. Supply chain collapse affecting economies worldwide. Wars breaking out across multiple continents. The largest land war in Europe since World War II. Ongoing conflict in the Middle East. Economic instability at a global scale. Famine conditions in multiple regions simultaneously. Earthquake activity documented across various locations. None of these individually is unusual in human history. Wars have always happened. Famines have always happened. Earthquakes have always happened. But the combination, the simultaneity, the pace, the fact that these things are happening all at once, across the entire globe, at the same time, that is the pattern Jesus described. Birth pains increasing in frequency, getting closer together, getting stronger. And here is what makes this moment different from every previous generation that thought it might be living in the end times. Previous generations could point to wars and famines and earthquakes. Every generation has had those. But previous generations could not point to Israel existing as a nation. They could not point to Jerusalem under Jewish control. They could not point to a global economic tracking system being technically operational. They could not point to the entire world being able to simultaneously watch a single event in real time. They could not point to knowledge increasing at an exponential rate driven by artificial intelligence. And they could not point to fresh water and fish appearing in the Dead Sea. This generation can point to all of it. At the same time, that is what makes this moment historically unique. Not one sign, not two signs. Every sign, aligned, simultaneously, right now. And if the signs are this aligned, then the question of timing is no longer academic. It is personal, because the next event on the prophetic timeline is not a geopolitical development. It is not a technological breakthrough. It is not an environmental change. It is something that involves every person on earth directly, something that has no warning, something that changes everything in a moment. And understanding what that is and what it means for ordinary people watching this video right now is exactly what comes next. Everything covered so far has been building toward one question. If the signs are aligned, if the prophecies are unfolding, if the timeline is moving, then what happens next? Not in the distant future, not in some theological abstraction. What actually happens next? In real terms, for real people. The answer is described in detail across multiple books of the Bible, and it unfolds in a specific sequence, a sequence that begins with something called the Rapture. The word rapture does not appear in most English Bible translations, but the event it describes does. The Apostle Paul, writing in the 1st century, described it this way: in a flash, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet, the dead in Christ will rise first. Then those who are alive and remain will be caught up together with them, to meet the Lord in the air. Paul is describing a sudden removal of believers from the earth, not a gradual disappearance, not a slow process. In a flash, in the twinkling of an eye. One moment they are here, the next they are not. Instantly, without warning, without a countdown. Jesus described it in similar terms. Two people working in a field. One is taken, one is left. Two people at a grinding wheel. One is taken, one is left. The separation is sudden, unexpected, and Jesus connected it directly to the signs he described. When you see all these things, he said, know that it is near, right at the door. Now here is why this matters for every person watching this video. The rapture is not described as a reward for being a good person. It is not based on church attendance, or moral behavior, or religious activity. Jesus made this extremely clear. He said many people would stand before him on Judgment Day and list everything they had done in his name. And he would say to them plainly, I never knew you. Knew, not knew about. Knew, personal relationship, direct connection, genuine faith. That is the dividing line. After the rapture, Ezekiel, Daniel, and Revelation all describe what follows. A period of 7 years. A time that Daniel called the final week of his 70 weeks prophecy. The last 7-year cycle before God's kingdom is established on earth. Revelation calls it the Tribulation, and the detail with which it is described makes it the most documented future event in Scripture. 7 years, but not 7 quiet years. The first half brings political upheaval, economic disruption, a world leader rising to prominence who appears to offer stability and peace. The second half is described as the worst period in human history. Wars of a scale not seen before, natural disasters intensifying, famine spreading, a persecution of people who refuse to align with the global system that emerges. Revelation describes judgments falling in waves. A third of the earth's vegetation destroyed, a third of sea life dying, water sources becoming toxic, darkness covering large portions of the earth. And at the center of this period is a choice. A specific, documented, unavoidable choice. The world leader who rises to power during this period will demand allegiance. A mark, a sign of loyalty, required to participate in the global economy. Without it, no buying, no selling, no access to the economic system. With it, participation in a system that Revelation says carries permanent consequences. For people who missed the rapture, for people who are alive during this period, that choice is the defining moment of their existence. It is not an abstract theological question at that point. It is a daily survival decision. Do you align with the system to feed your family? Or do you hold to faith at enormous personal cost? Revelation is not vague about what happens to those who take the mark. It describes consequences that are described as final and permanent. And it is also not vague about what happens to those who refuse it and hold to faith. It describes a multitude that no one can count. From every nation, every language, every background, standing before God, safe, complete, having come through the tribulation without compromising. Now here is the tension that every person watching this needs to sit with. The tribulation is described as a period when people can still be saved, still turn to faith, still choose Jesus. But the conditions make that choice immeasurably harder than it is right now. Right now, choosing faith costs nothing in most of the Western world. There is no economic penalty, no physical danger, no forced allegiance to an opposing system. The choice is available in complete safety. During the tribulation, that same choice could cost everything: property, income, freedom, ultimately life itself. This is why the timing matters. This is why the Dead Sea transformation is not just an interesting environmental story. It is a marker on a timeline that has a next event. And that next event is the rapture, which means the window for making this decision from a position of safety is open right now. And windows close. But the story does not end with the tribulation. It does not end with judgment and darkness. Because after 7 years, after the tribulation reaches its conclusion, something happens that changes the entire trajectory of human history. Something that every prophet from Ezekiel to Daniel to John described. Something that the Dead Sea transformation is pointing toward. Something that is not just about avoiding judgment. Something genuinely, profoundly worth understanding. Because it is the reason all of this is happening. It is the destination the entire prophetic timeline is moving toward. And it is unlike anything that has existed in human history. Most conversations about the end times stop at the tribulation, at the judgment, at the chaos, at the darkness. And people walk away with a picture of the future that is almost entirely negative. That is not the complete picture. Not even close. Because the tribulation is not the destination. It is the passage. What comes after it is the reason the prophets kept writing. After the 7 years, after the tribulation reaches its conclusion, Jesus returns. Not invisibly, not spiritually, not symbolically, physically, visibly, every eye seeing it. Revelation describes it as lightning flashing from the east to the west. Unmistakable, undeniable, every person on earth aware of it simultaneously. He returns with those who were taken in the rapture, and he defeats the armies that have gathered against Jerusalem. Ezekiel described these armies in chapters 38 and 39. Their defeat is decisive, complete, final, and after it, Ezekiel says the nations recognize what has happened. They understand that Israel is under divine protection. They understand that the God of Israel is real, not as a religious position, as an observed fact. Then something begins that has no parallel in human history. A 1,000-year reign, the millennial kingdom, Jesus governing from Jerusalem, peace established across the earth, not enforced peace through military dominance, genuine peace, because the source of conflict has been removed. The prophets describe what this period looks like in remarkable detail. Isaiah describes a time when weapons of war are repurposed, swords beaten into tools for farming, spears into pruning hooks, nations not learning war anymore, children playing safely in streets that were previously dangerous, the elderly living full lives without fear. Creation itself is described as restored, the damage done to ecosystems, the instability in weather patterns, the broken relationship between humanity and the natural world, all of it healed, the land producing abundantly, the climate stable, deserts becoming fertile ground, and one of the most specific images in that restoration picture, the Dead Sea, full, alive, fishermen working its shores from En-Gedi northward, exactly as Ezekiel described. The prophecy of the Dead Sea is not just about what is beginning now. It is a preview of what the complete restoration looks like, a sample of what is coming. Revelation expands on the millennial kingdom with a description of the New Jerusalem, a city, a real, physical city, descending, established, with dimensions, with gates named after the 12 tribes of Israel, with foundations named after the 12 apostles. The entire history of God's relationship with humanity honored in the architecture of a single city. The description of what life is like in that city is worth sitting with. No more death, not reduced mortality, not longer lifespans. No death, no more mourning, no more crying, no more pain, not less of these things, none of these things, because the conditions that produce them no longer exist. The old order has passed away. God described as dwelling directly with his people, not in a distant heaven, not separated by dimension or distance, present, physical, accessible, walking among people the way he walked in the garden before everything broke. Full relationship restored. The thing that was lost at the beginning of human history returned. The Apostle Paul wrote something about this that puts the entire picture in perspective. He said that the sufferings of the present time are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed. Not minimizing the suffering, not pretending the tribulation is not severe, not dismissing the pain of the present world, but saying that when you place them side by side with what comes after, the comparison is not even close. And here's the thing about all of this that is easy to miss. This future is not reserved for a special category of exceptional people. It is not for the most religious, the most knowledgeable, the most disciplined. Revelation describes the multitude standing before the throne as people from every nation, every language, every background, ordinary people who made a decision, who trusted Jesus, who held to that trust through whatever they faced. That is the qualification, not perfection, not performance, trust. And the river that Ezekiel saw flowing from the temple, John sees it again in Revelation. A river of life flowing from the throne of God, clear as crystal, on both sides, trees of life, producing fruit every month. And the leaves of those trees described as bringing healing to the nations. The same image, the same river, the same life flowing where there was only death. Ezekiel saw the beginning of it. John saw the completion of it. Two men, separated by centuries, describing the same vision, because it was the same vision, shown to both of them by the same source. This is where the Dead Sea fits in the complete picture. It is not a curiosity. It is not an environmental footnote. It is the first visible evidence that the restoration Ezekiel described is beginning. The river is starting to flow. The salt water is starting to yield. The fish are starting to appear. And if the beginning of this restoration is visible now, then the completion of it is closer than it has ever been. Which means the decision every person watching this video faces is not an abstract theological one. It is a practical one, with a timeline attached to it. A timeline that is compressing. And the next section is about exactly what that decision looks like. Not in theory, in real, practical, daily life terms. Because understanding prophecy without responding to it is the most dangerous position anyone can be in. Everything in this video has been building toward this moment. Not to inform, not to educate, not to entertain, to bring every person watching to a single point of decision. Because information without response is just noise. And the stakes here are too high for noise. So here is the direct question. If everything covered in this video is accurate, if the prophecies are real, if the timeline is moving, if the signs are aligned, what are you going to do about it? Not eventually, not when things get worse, not when the signs become undeniable. Right now, today, in this moment, start with the most important question first. Do you have a personal relationship with Jesus? Not familiarity with his story, not agreement with his teachings, not attendance at a church that talks about him. Relationship, the kind of knowing that Jesus described when he said he would tell some people on Judgment Day that he never knew them. That word "knew" is everything. It means direct, personal, real. The question is whether that exists for you. If the answer is no, or if the answer is uncertain, then here is what that decision actually looks like. It is not complicated. It is not a program. It is not a process that takes months. It is a recognition and a response. The recognition is this. Every person has fallen short of what God requires. Not some people, not bad people. Every person. The Bible is clear on this point without exception. And no amount of effort, religious activity, or moral achievement changes that fundamental condition. The response is this. Jesus paid the price for that shortfall. His death was not the execution of a good teacher. It was a substitution. He took on the consequence that every human being deserved. And his resurrection was the confirmation that the payment was accepted, complete, sufficient, final. Accepting that is not a prayer formula. It is not a specific set of words spoken in a specific order. It is genuine acknowledgement, real belief, actual surrender, saying to Jesus directly, I know I cannot fix this myself. I believe you paid for it. I am putting my life in your hands. That is it. That is the decision. And the moment it is genuine, everything changes. Not feelings necessarily. Not immediate emotional experience. Status. Permanent, irrevocable status. Saved. Secure. Known. Now for people who have already made that decision. For believers who are watching this, the call is different. It is not a call to a first decision. It is a call to a deeper response. First, get into Scripture seriously. Not casually. Not occasionally. Seriously. The Bible is not a comfort book to be read in small doses when things get hard. It is a map. A detailed, specific, historically verified map of where history is going and how to navigate it. The end times section specifically, Daniel, Zechariah, Ezekiel, the Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, Revelation. These are not optional reading for people who enjoy prophecy. These are essential reading for anyone who wants to understand the moment they are living in. Start with the Gospel of John. Understand who Jesus is and what he did. Then move through the epistles. Then into the prophets. Make it daily. Make it serious. Make it a priority above entertainment and above news consumption. Because the Bible contains more relevant information about the current moment in history than any news source on earth. Second, find a community, not a building, not a social club with religious language. A genuine community of people who take Scripture seriously, who understand prophecy, who are paying attention to the signs, who will challenge you, support you, pray with you, hold you accountable. The end times are not designed to be navigated alone. The early church understood this. They met constantly. They supported each other. They shared resources and faith and knowledge. That model exists for a reason. Find it. Be part of it. Invest in it. Third, tell people. This is the part that most believers quietly skip. Understanding what is coming and saying nothing to the people around you is not an option. Not when the stakes are this clear. Not when the timeline is this visible. Think about it practically. If you knew a severe storm was coming and your neighbors had no idea, silence would be irresponsible. The spiritual version of that is no different. The people in your life who do not know Jesus. Your family members, your friends, your coworkers, they need to hear this. Not in a pressured or aggressive way. Not with condemnation or fear tactics. With genuine concern. With clear information. With an invitation. Point them to Scripture. Share what you understand. Give them the chance to make an informed decision. That is your responsibility as someone who has this information. Fourth, examine your priorities honestly. Jesus asked a question that does not get easier with time. What does it profit a person to gain the whole world and lose their soul? In practical terms, that means this. What are you spending the majority of your time, energy, and resources on? Is it things that will matter in eternity? Or is it things that will be completely irrelevant when the timeline concludes? Career is not wrong. Finances are not wrong. Comfort is not wrong. But when they become the primary focus, when they crowd out faith and relationships and eternal priorities, that is a problem, especially now, especially when the signs are this clear. A realignment of priorities is not weakness. It is wisdom. Fifth, prepare practically. This is not a call to panic buying or bunker construction. It is a call to basic, sensible preparation. Emergency supplies, a plan for your family, resources set aside. The Bible explicitly describes this kind of foresight as wisdom. A prudent person sees danger and prepares, not in fear, in wisdom, the same way you carry an umbrella when the forecast calls for rain. Practical preparation is not a lack of faith. It is faith expressed responsibly. Sixth, pray, not as a religious exercise, not as a scheduled obligation, as a genuine, ongoing conversation with God about what is happening in the world and in your own life. Tell Him what concerns you. Ask for wisdom. Ask for courage. Ask for clarity. The peace that the Bible promises is not the absence of difficulty. It is a specific, supernatural stability that exists in the middle of difficulty. It comes through prayer, through bringing every concern directly to God and trusting that He is working in ways that are not always visible. That peace is available right now to anyone who asks for it. And finally, live with purpose every single day. Not in panic, not in fear, not in withdrawal from the world. With purpose, every interaction matters. Every relationship matters. Every decision matters. Because time is not unlimited. The window is open right now. For decision, for relationship, for impact. And windows close. The Dead Sea is coming back to life. The signal is there. The timeline is moving. And the most important thing anyone can do in response to that is not to watch and wait. It is to act, to decide, to commit, to live accordingly. Because what comes after all of this is worth every cost, worth every sacrifice, worth every difficult conversation, worth every priority realignment. And it is available to everyone watching this video. Right now, today, before the window closes. Come back to where this started. The Dead Sea, 1,400 feet below sea level. The lowest point on the surface of the earth, 10 times saltier than any ocean. Lifeless for 4,000 years. A place so defined by death that its name became a synonym for it. And now, fresh water breaking through cracked ground. Underground springs unsealed by sinkholes that nobody predicted. Fish swimming in pools where nothing has lived for millennia. Tilapia, thriving. In the shadow of the saltiest body of water on Earth. Photographers documenting it. Scientists recording it. A prophecy written 2,600 years ago becoming a verifiable, photographable, measurable reality. This is not the end of the Dead Sea story. It is the beginning of it. Because Ezekiel did not describe a trickle of fresh water and a few fish in sinkholes. He described a river, growing deeper as it flowed. Ankle deep, knee deep, waist deep, too deep to cross. A full river, flowing east, reaching the Dead Sea, transforming it completely. Fishermen from En-Gedi to En-Eglaim. Nets spread out to dry. Fish of every kind. Abundance where there was only death. That is not fully here yet. But the beginning of it is. And Ezekiel's track record demands that the beginning be taken seriously. Because the beginning of Tyre's destruction looked like a retreating population. Before it looked like a demolished city. Before it looked like fishermen on bare rock. The beginning of Cyrus looked like a child being born in Persia. Before it looked like a king. Before it looked like a decree that set an entire people free. Beginnings do not look like completions, but they always lead to them. The Dead Sea is in its beginning stage. And what Ezekiel said follows this beginning is already in motion. The nation restored. Done. The people returning. Done. The spiritual awakening. Happening now. The geopolitical alignments. Forming now. The technological infrastructure for end-time systems. Operational now. The global instability. Visible now. Every layer of the sequence Ezekiel described, either fulfilled or currently developing. Now think about what that means for the generation alive right now. Jesus said that the generation that sees all these signs will not pass away before everything is fulfilled. This is that generation. Not the generation that saw Israel become a nation. Not the generation that saw Jerusalem reunified. This generation, the one watching fish appear in the Dead Sea. The one living inside a global technological infrastructure that makes every end times prophecy technically possible. The one watching the geopolitical alliances Ezekiel named form in real time. This generation. And here is what that means practically. The question is no longer whether these prophecies are accurate. The track record answers that. The question is no longer whether the timeline is moving. The evidence answers that. The only question that remains is personal. Are you ready? Not as a rhetorical closing question, as a genuine, practical, urgent question. If the rapture happened today, if this was the moment, would you be among those taken? Or would you be among those left to face what follows? That question used to feel distant for most people. Something to think about eventually. Something to take seriously when the signs got clearer. But the signs are as clear as they have ever been. And the window for making this decision safely, quietly, without persecution or pressure or economic consequence, that window does not stay open forever. Ezekiel saw the river start as a trickle, just water seeping out from under the threshold of the temple, barely noticeable at first. But it kept flowing, and it got deeper, and it kept flowing, and it became too deep to cross. And it reached the Dead Sea, and the Dead Sea changed. That river is flowing right now, not metaphorically, not symbolically. Fresh water is physically moving into the Dead Sea region. The prophecy is in motion. And once a river starts flowing, it does not stop. It gets deeper. It gets wider. It reaches its destination. The prophet who wrote this was a priest living in exile, separated from everything he knew, living in a foreign land with no visible reason for hope. And God showed him something. Not just the Dead Sea coming back to life. The complete picture. The restoration of a nation. The return of a people. The spiritual awakening. The divine intervention. The kingdom established. The river of life flowing from God's throne. The New Jerusalem. God dwelling with his people forever. He saw all of it, and he wrote it down. And 2,600 years later, the part that everyone thought was impossible has begun. Which means the parts that seemed even more impossible are coming too. The parts about the kingdom. About the restoration of all creation. About God dwelling directly with his people. About no more death, no more mourning, no more pain. Those parts are coming. Because the river is flowing, and rivers reach their destination. The Dead Sea has been called dead for 4,000 years, and it is coming alive. If a name that accurate, held for 4 millennia, can change, then everything can change, and everything is going to. The only question is whether you will be ready when it does. The fish are in the water, the springs are flowing, the prophecy is moving, and the next stage of Ezekiel's vision does not involve the Dead Sea at all. It involves the nations. It involves Israel. It involves a military event on a scale that Ezekiel described in specific geographic detail. An event that the current geopolitical landscape is arranging itself to accommodate. An event that once it begins, accelerates everything else. An event that is closer now than it has ever been. Because the stage before it is happening right now. In a desert. In a salt lake. In the lowest place on earth. Where fish are swimming in water that should have killed them. And a prophet who died 2,600 years ago is being proven right. Again,